Good morning, class. Let us start with our today's topic, individual demand and market demand. In our previous class, we studied about meaning of demand and different type of demand. Today, we will start with individual demand. As we all know that individual demand refers to the demand for a commodity by an individual consumer or an individual household. Okay, it simply represents the individual demand, the quantity of the commodity that an individual, or we can say a household consumer, is willing to buy at a given price during a given period of time is called individual demand. Suppose, for example, suppose Swastika wish to buy a commodity from market. Okay, then he will go to market and buy different commodity, or you can say that same commodity in different prices in different days. For example, Swastika buy sugar rupees 30. When the price of sugar is rupees 30, she will buy quantity 1 kg of sugar. When the price is 29, she will buy 2. When the price is 28, she will buy 3. So this type of this represents the individual demand. If we talk about market demand is the total demand for a commodity that all the consumer or all the households in the market are willing to buy at a given price during a given period of time. It simply represents the market demand. Okay, suppose Swastika wish to buy 2 apple, and Mayank wish to buy 3 apple, and Shireen wish to buy 10 apples. So the summation of all these individuals demand, it simply becomes market demand. When we sum all the three demand of all these people, it simply represents the market demand, because this is the demand of whole class, we can say that. That's why it is known as market demand. Okay, now demand schedule. If we talk about schedule, the demand schedule summarize the information on price and quantity demanded. It shows different quantity of a commodity demanded per period of time at different prices. Okay, now demand schedule may be of two type: individual demand schedule or market demand schedule. Now, the first of all, individual demand schedule. What is individual demand schedule? Individual demand schedule shows demand for a commodity by a particular individual or household at different price of that commodity at a given time period. Okay, it simply represents the demand of an individual. For example, as I told you that suppose Swastika wish to buy sugar, then the price of the sugar and the quantity demanded by Swastika. Okay, this is represent in a table, it's simply known as, or this is represent in a schedule, it's simply known as individual schedule. Suppose when the price of sugar is 30, she buy 1. When the price is 29, she buy 2 quantity. When the price is 28, she buy 3. So this simply represents and the individual demand schedule. Okay, now if you move to the market demand schedule. Okay, market demand schedule, we will find that market demand schedule shows the quantity of a given commodity which all individual household in the market would demand at different prices. Okay, as I told you that suppose Swastika wish to buy 2, and Mayank wish to buy 10, and Shireen wish to buy 5. So the summation of these consumer, it simply represent in a tabular form, which is known as market demand schedule. In our example, we can see that suppose consumer A, consumer B, consumer C, and and consumer A, B, and C. This graph represents the summation of A, B, C. Suppose we have 3 consumer, then summation of all these consumer A, then summation of all these consumer A, B, and C becomes ABC, which is the market demand. This is the market demand. Okay, when you sum up the demand of consumer A with consumer B and consumer C, then the total of these becomes the market demand. Okay, demand of Swastika, demand of Mayank, demand of Shireen, then the demand of these 3 becomes our market demand. And when we plot this market demand with this price in a graphical form, like this, then it simply represents the market demand. Okay, this is the summation of all the 3 individual consumer. You can see that in our x-axis we have quantity, in our y-axis we have price. okay, which is from this particular table, which is from this particular table. You can see that this is the quantity or this is the price. Okay, now this price will be plotted in y axis and this quantity will be plotted in x axis, and then we sum up the demand of all the three individual 1, 2 and 3, and it become the market demand curve. Okay, or market demand curve. We can get the market demand curve from this particular market demand schedule. Now if we talk about the curve, what is demand curve? Demand curve basically represents the graphic information, or the graphical representation of the demand schedule is simply known as demand curve. It may be individual or market demand. Okay, so in case of individual demand curve, we studied with the help of individual table the plot in this individual table. Then by this individual table we get figure 1.1 as our demand curve, and next with the help of this market demand schedule we will get this demand curve. Okay, this represents the market demand curve. Okay students, now let's move to our next topic, which is determination of demand or demand function. This is also one of the important concept in from demand point of view. Now what are the determinants or what are the factors which influence demand? Okay, as we all know that our demand is influenced by so many factors, and in this particular chapter we are studying about only price. Okay, so when we talk about price and demand, it simply represents law of demand. Apart from this price, there are so many factors which influence our demand. Like, what are those factors? Okay, we will study in this particular section. Now as we all know that we have again two demand functions. One is individual demand function, and the second one is market demand function. Now first of all, individual demand function. This individual demand function shows the functional relationship between demand for a commodity by a consumer in the market and the various determinant. It shows the functional relationship between demand of a commodity in the market with so many determinants or with different variables in the market. Now individual demand function can be expressed as, we can express individual demand function as demand function. If you can see in our diagram, you will find that dx is a function of px, py, px, pt, y, t and e. Now this demand, we can say that what is this demand function? This demand function represents demand is a function of px, price of the commodity, pt, price of the other related commodity, y, income of the consumer, t, taste and preference, and e, expectation of the future prices. So these are the variables. Okay, like like the price of related good means the price of other goods, the taste of the consumer, the income of the consumer, the expectation, all these variable influence our demand. That's why this is known as individual demand function. Our next is market demand function. Market demand function shows the same thing, the functional relationship between demand of a commodity and the market. Okay, this represents the same thing, but there is a few variables which is different from individual point of view. Whatever variable you studied in individual demand function, they all are repeated in the market demand function, but there are only three variable which is different from the individual point of view, because these variables influence economy as a whole. That's why these variables are part of market demand schedule. For in the case of market demand schedule, you will find that market demand is a function of px, pt, y, t, e, n, yd and g. Okay, now this function represents कि market demand is a function of price of other related goods, y, income of the consumer, price of the commodity, taste and preference of the consumer, expectation of future price, population, yd, distribution of income, and g, government policy. So all these are market demand variables which influence the market demand function. Now we have three different variables apart from individual, which is population, another one is distribution of income, and the next one is government policy. These three variables influence market demand. Okay, market demand. That's why these three variables are included in our market demand function apart from individual demand function. Okay, student, now move to our next topic, which is determinants of individual demand. What are the determinants of individual demand? Okay, now if we talk about the determinant of individual demand, the first is price of the commodity, which we studied in our demand function. Okay, now we are explaining this demand function separately. So the first is price of the commodity. As we all know that price of a commodity play an important role in determination of the demand. When price of a commodity increases, its quantity demanded decreases. When price of a commodity decreases, its quantity demanded increases. That's why it simply represents in price of a commodity, which influence our demand curve. Next is price of related good. The demand for a commodity depend not only on its own price, not only the price of the commodity, but it also affected by the price of related good. Now the question is, what are those related goods? Those related goods are substitute goods and complementary goods. We have two type of goods, substitute good and complementary good. Okay, the demand of these goods also influence the demand of that commodity which you used to buy. That's why it is also known as cross demand effect. Okay, if the change in the price of one good affect the demand of another good, it is called as cross demand effect. Okay, we can call it cross demand effect. Now the question is, what is substitute good? Now what is if we talk about substitute good, two goods are substitute with one another. If one can be used in place of the other, then it's simply known as substitute good, or we can say that competitive good. For example, we have tea and coffee. Tea and coffee is substitute good. Okay, gel pen, ink pen is the substitute good. Okay, Colgate and Pepsodent is the substitute good. Substitute good simply represents, suppose you have a shortfall of one commodity, then the same demand or same wish you can fulfill with the help of another commodity. It simply represents your substitute good, and we can find that there is a direct relationship between substitute goods. How? Suppose the price of Colgate increases. Okay, the price of Colgate increases, and at the same price the price of Pepsodent remain constant, so you will switch from Colgate to Pepsodent. This is substitute good. Similarly, we can see with the help of another example, which is tea and coffee. If price of coffee increases in the market, then you will switch to tea. So you can see that when price of one commodity increases in substitute good, we will automatically shift in the alternative goods, or the alternative commodity available in the market, or the substitute available in the market. That's why it is known as substitute good. If we talk about complementary goods are those goods which are used together to satisfy a particular want. Okay, these goods are also known as joint good, because the combination of these goods satisfy the individual's demand. For example, car and petrol. For example, bread and butter. These commodities are used simultaneously or jointly to satisfy the demand. Suppose you have car but you don't have the petrol, then there is no use of car. Suppose you have petrol and you don't have the car, then there is no use of car. So these goods are those goods which we use simultaneously or which we use jointly to satisfy our demand. That's why it is known as complementary good. Okay, now move to the difference between, as I told you, the difference between substitute good and complementary good. The same you can see with the help of table. This is the difference between, you have to write down all these points in your notebook. Okay, students, now substitute good and complementary good. We can see the difference between substitute and complementary with the help of 3 points. First, meaning substitute good, these are the goods which can be used in place of one another. If we talk about complementary good, these are the goods which are consumed together. Okay, second is type of demand. Substitutes good are competitive in nature, complementary goods are joint goods. So they are whenever they are demanded in a joint way. Okay, Next is relation of price. The demand of one good varies directly with the price of the substitute. As I told you, when the price of when the price of coffee increases, people will switch towards tea. So there is a direct relationship. When price of a commodity increases, one commodity increases, then demand of other commodity increases in the market. That's why it is substitute good. And if you talk about complementary good, there is inverse relationship. When price of car increases, then demand of petrol decreases. Or you can say that when price of petrol increases, then demand for car decreases. That's why it is known as indirect. That's why this is known as a complementary good, or there is a indirect relationship between these goods. Is it clear, student? Now we will move to our next point, which is income of the consumer. As you know that income of the consumer also play an important role in determining demand. When income of a consumer increases, he will buy more of a commodity. When income of a consumer decreases, he will buy less of a commodity. So income play an important role in the determination of demand. Okay, now income influence a good income also influence a good by different ways. It's also different upon the quality of the good, whether it is normal good or inferior good. Like in the normal good, when income increases, demand also increases. Okay, this is the case of normal goods. And in case of inferior good, when income increases, demand decreases. Now the question is, what is inferior good? The question is, what is inferior good? Inferior goods are low quality goods. For example, dalda, for example, maize. If you have a more income, then student, you will go for basmati chawal, basmati rice, or you will go for or the normal rice. Okay, you will go for the basmati rice because you have good income. And suppose if you have low income, then you will go for the normal rice. So that's why income of a consumer influence the demand. Next is again the same thing. Income of the consumer we have divided into two part. You can see the normal goods or the inferior goods. In the case of normal goods are those goods the demand for which increases with increase in the income of the consumer, as I told you. Okay, now inferior goods are those goods the demand for which falls as income of the consumer increases. When your income increases, the demand for these goods decreases. It simply represents that the demand of normal or inferior goods also influence the demand curve of a commodity. Is it clear? Dear student, just know that a good can be a normal good for a consumer at same level of income, and an inferior good at the other level of income, at the particular level of income. Suppose when the income of the individual is rupees 1000. Okay, he is earning 1000 rupees. Then the dalda or the refined oil is a normal good for an individual. Suppose when his income increases from rupees 1000 to 10,000, then the same dalda becomes or the refined becomes inferior good for the individual, because now he can purchase ghee as as a new good, or he can purchase ghee as a superior good. That's why income of the consumer also influence our demand curve. Okay, demand determination. Now the next point is taste and preference. Taste and preference also play an important role in influence the demand curve. How? The amount of demand of a commodity also depend on the consumer taste and preference. When we begin to like certain commodities, their demand will increase. Okay, taste and preference. Suppose you like chocolates, to eat more chocolates. Okay, when the price of chocolate increases, suppose dairy milk cost is rupees 50, and when it becomes 55, okay, then at the same price, you will not left your good. You begin with the you are going through the okay, you are going through the consumption of that particular good, because the taste and preference, the taste which you like, okay, that taste is not influenced by the price of the commodity. That's why when price of the chocolate increases from 50 to 55, you will not leave the chocolate, you continue your demand. Okay, because of taste. And if you talk about preferences, then the preference of a commodity also influence the demand curve. Suppose you prefer some goods, you went to the market and you wish to buy a t-shirt. Okay, and the t-shirt is from a good brand, like a Adidas t-shirt. then the price did not matters to you. You just go and buy that particular t-shirt because it's your preference. Then you will not switch to a low quality because of the preference. Now the next point is consumer credit facility. This consumer credit facility also play an important role in determining of demand. Now if credit is available, if credit facilities are provided at low rate of interest by the banks or sellers of the commodity or household, then the demand for that particular commodity increases. It simply represents the debt facility. If debt facilities increases in the market, then you will buy or demand more goods, otherwise you will demand less goods. Okay student, that's it for today lecture. We will continue with determination of market demand in our next lecture. Thank you student.